various destinations. The taxi industry remains highly unreformed, meaning that it's been relatively the same for the past 20 years, where there's been no new introductions into technology or anything like that. And this obviously leaves room for innovation. So this is where the taxi app comes in. The taxi app is a new innovation in the sense where it works both with the taxi owners, the taxi users, and also the taxi drivers as well, in order to establish well-established routes and to assist daily commuters in their everyday commute, and also to make it easier for them to find their taxis, which will also make it much more safer because they don't have to ask random strangers where their taxis are located. So how does the taxi app work? So firstly, you download the taxi app using either the Google app if you're using an Android, or the iPhone App Store if you're using an iOS platform. Then after you log in using your email address. Once you've logged in using your email address, you will enable your location. And once you've enabled your location, all the taxi ranks, routes, and taxi destinations will be made available to you solely by the press of a button. The user profiles are basically new job seekers who need to locate their taxis to go to their work interview or to their first day, to their new work destination. Backpackers who want to travel the city and get a lively city experience in a very safe way where they do not necessarily have to ask any strangers where their taxis are located. New arrivals in the city, so it could be either students that are coming either from Limpopo or the Eastern Cape that do not know where their taxis are located to. It can also be shoppers, people that are shopping out of town where they live, and they're looking for the most suitable and the most convenient taxi route or taxi destination possible. And it can also be adopted by daily commuters, people that use taxis every day, but just generally cannot find the relevant taxi on where they're supposed to go to. So the potential revenue that this app will potentially produce basically will be done through subscription. So as soon as for the app, you have a subscription fee of 15 cents. And also we seek on attracting advertising revenue. Be basically advertising that will take place on the app, and you'll have to. And considering the numbers of daily commuters, we're expecting a number of close to 10 million subscribers using our app. Okay, thank you. Are there any questions?
Yeah, I have a few questions. So how is it beneficial to people that drive taxis?
So how it's beneficial for people to drive taxis is that they do not necessarily need to hire any queue marshals or anything of that sort. That means more money for them. So that's the biggest benefit, and also it also increases the reputation of taxis. So taxis become much to use. So that's the biggest benefit to taxi drivers.
So you said that it's essentially it cuts out the middleman of I don't know, the people that take the money and direct things. How would the
Correct.
taxi, I don't know what they're called, but how would the taxi industry feel about removing that entire job for an app?
Well, they'll obviously have to repurpose the job in the sense that obviously maybe we can hire some of those queue marshals in order to establish the different routes since they're very well knowledgeable about the existing routes and also where to catch the taxis as well. So instead of them being based at the taxi rank, they can be based in our offices and help us draft and also help us update the forever changing taxi routes because taxi routes consistently change, and also where the taxis are located consistently change as well. So it'll become more of a formalized market than an informal market. So instead of them standing in the taxi ranks, directing traffic, they'll simply work for us, and they'll also be available just from a click of a button.
I mean, that sounds good in theory, but given the taxi industry, I would imagine, and please correct me if I'm wrong, controls the routes, wouldn't you become the middleman at that point?
Well, of course, I mean, hence the reason why I think it has a potential, it can most definitely be monetized, and it has create serious revenue. So it also makes it much more safer, because the experience that a lot of people have is that sometimes they get to MTN taxi rank, and once they get into MTN taxi rank, they approach a person, they ask the person, where's the taxi located, let's say to go to Braamfontein. As soon as they get the person, as soon as they ask that person leads them there, and after they threaten to take out 50 Rand. It's a very common thing that happens, especially in MTN taxi rank. So not only does it make, well, obviously it is most definitely, our main aim is to serve society, and also to create revenue as well, because you're still a business at the end of the day. But most importantly, it makes it much more safer for the taxi commuter to use, in a sense where they won't necessarily have to ask a person that they do not trust at the taxi rank. They can just simply consult their app, and they'll get the destination to where the taxi are based.
Cool.
So, I'm thinking of how do you manage that sort of transition of disrupting an industry that is traditionally rigid in terms of how it moves. It has its own patterns. They want to stick to their own patterns. How do you introduce, because there is space for innovation in the taxi industry, that, yeah, for sure, given. But how do you what kind of crisis management, what kind of interventions do you therefore take to introduce something this extreme that even cuts out the queue marshal, who is a very big solid figure in the whole taxi industry?
Well, firstly, although it does disrupt the taxi market very abruptly, but at the same time, nothing can be done without the cooperation of the big taxi bosses and the taxi associations. So our main strategy with regards to stakeholder relations is to consult the taxi drivers, and also consult the taxi bosses and the taxi associations as well. So this will be a collaborative project, from from app developers to taxi bosses, and also to the different stakeholders within the taxi industry. So nothing will be done without the input of stakeholders within the taxi industry. And it also seeks to benefit all stakeholders in the taxi industry, because the current problem that the taxi industry has is that it has a bad reputation in terms of not only safety but reliability as well. So it will attract more users, in a sense where users are locate their taxis and more accurately, and they're also safer as well, because they do not have to consult any strangers. But obviously this won't be done in a silo. This will be done with collaboration of all stakeholders in the taxi industry.
And what's the incentive for the taxi bosses and the whole industry as a whole? Is it just
Well, the main, although there is a monetary on the side of the taxi owners, in the sense where a part of the revenues made from this taxi app will go to different taxi associations in Johannesburg, but it's also that it makes taxis more creditable. I mean, more credible, and it also makes taxis much more safer, which adds to the credibility of the taxi industry. So no longer will people have to fear with that as soon as they arrive in Johannesburg, they don't know exactly where to go, and they suddenly get scammed. So this will add to the credibility of not only the taxi industry, but it will also make the taxi industry appear more safe for the end user.
Hey, Zoe. So as an investor, I would invest money in you to create new revenue streams, not to give my investment to an industry that already has a monopoly over transportation. So my question to you is why do you think the most profitable route is engaging the taxi industry and like creating some profit or some revenue sharing agreements rather than ignoring in some ways the taxi industry and just creating an app that is for taxi riders rather than the industry and riders?
Okay, so just to get your question, you said why would I include the taxi industry in terms of the potential revenue owners, and why don't I just solely create an app just for taxi users? Am I getting your point correctly?
Exactly. So like Eskom to Pus, like I think there's a lot of parallels between Eskom and the taxi industry in some ways. Eskom to Pus also makes money off of advertisements.
All right.
But they are
Well, the reason why I'd like to include the taxi industry is because the taxi industry is a very complex industry in the sense that firstly, it's not only it's a very, how can I put it? It's a very well knit that own taxis. And if you're going to come with such an idea that's going to revolutionize how people find their routes and also how people find their taxis, you cannot necessarily do it without the cooperation of the taxi industry itself. So in order to create an incentive for the taxi industry to get a buy-in into the app, there also needs to be a monetary gain on their end. And that's the first thing that I suppose they'll be most interested in, as to how do we benefit from this app monetarily. Because at the same time, it's not only although it mostly seeks to help the end user, which is the commuter, it also seeks to help the taxi owners and also the different stakeholders in the taxi industry itself, in the sense that it makes it more creditable. As I mentioned before, the taxi industry has remained untransformed for the past 20 years. It's operated the same as it has in the 1980s. So and this type of app will not be possible without the buy-in from the taxi industry itself, because in order to attain the different routes, in order to also attain the data that is supposed to support the information that's supposed to support the app itself, it will need the buy-in from the taxi owners and the different stakeholders in the taxi industry itself.
Okay, I would challenge you.
I don't know if I answered the question.
I would challenge you to have a very clear revenue stream that makes investors feel comfortable that investors feel comfortable that a part of the profits that you're going to be making are going away from you and them, ultimately
Right.
speaking. You need to make dollars and cents, because right now as an investor, I'm like, this feels bad because the taxi industry is notoriously notorious. You know what I mean? And for you to have to share profits with them in order to operate alone, based on what you're saying, that's scary to me. You know what I'm saying?
Although without a doubt, it is a notorious business. But we also have to look at it from a user basis. Close to 15 million or close to 10 million people use taxis on an annual basis. And this cannot necessarily be ignored. And the taxi industry is a multi-billion rand industry in the country. So although there have been incidents of violence and such, but this also seeks basically to add credibility to the business itself, which I don't think is something that the taxi bosses or any of the taxi stakeholders would have any problem with. In fact, there would actually be a bigger incentive for them to buy into the project rather than oppose it. And with regards to the to the